welcome back to the Epicenter. Today, we have we have a really amazing guest named Andy Lee. But before we start, Epicenter is an in-depth series featuring business leaders and entrepreneurs who are helping to shape today's digital economy. Andy Lee, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
It's awesome to see you here in the Epicenter.
Yes.
In Bangkok.
Oh, so
been a while.
So good to be back. Yeah, it's been 3 years.
3 years?
3 years. 3 years plus. Yeah. Used to come a lot in my past lives and different jobs, and obviously for trips and holidays and stuff. So it's good. It's good to come back and see all the updates.
Yeah, it's Bangkok has improved. So if you haven't been here in a while, I encourage you to come visit.
It's a matter of time, right?
Yeah, we've had a huge influx of visitors this year. So really exciting, and also gives me the opportunity to meet old friends and people that have something to say. Yeah,
you don't have to sell Bangkok, right? It sells itself. Thailand sells itself, and everyone will come through. So it's good.
So I guess some people don't know much about you. Shame on them. But this is Andy Lee. Andy Lee, just kind of, where did you grow up? How did you get, whether it's back to Asia, and what did you learn from working in companies like the NBA, Kabam, Uber, and how did that help you as a professional?
Oh my gosh. How much time do you have on this show?
So we got all the time that we need.
I will try to keep it high level, but I was born in southern Taiwan.
Nice.
In Tainan. And it's funny, when I go back to Taiwan, everyone's like, you're not from around here, And I'm like, no, I can prove
it. You're I'm born in Taiwan too.
I know you are.
Damn!
We're like, what's up, Team Taiwan?
Team Taiwan.
That's right. So I was born in Taiwan, and then there's a debate among my family whether it's 5 or 6 I moved to the U.S. And so with a lot of my friends, they're like, you are so American, but I think I spent half my life outside of America. So I grew up in California, Southern California, went to school in the Bay Area, and then embarked on this crazy journey.
Like Cal?
I did go to Berkeley. Go Bears!
Bears! Go Ducks, man!
Yeah,
go Ducks.
So I went on
Ducks.
The Ducks and the Bears. So I went on this crazy journey. Who knew life would take me from California, and I graduated with a business degree, and then at that time it was really trendy to go into investment banking, finance. Meanwhile, Silicon Valley 1.0 was just getting started, so it was also trendy to leave banking and do that. But I stayed in banking just to watch it all implode. With .com kind of imploding in San Francisco, but then I ended up in London for a year, just in time for 9/11, in which my entire kind of tech team, I'd say, 75% was laid off after that point in time. And at that point, it was either go back to the US or try something else. And I mean, growing up, I was one of those kids that thought I was going to live and die in California. And here I am in Bangkok talking to you. So obviously life took me in a different direction.
Yeah.
And at that moment I was like, well, I can go back to the US or try something else. And so I knew one person in Shanghai at that point. And I was like, well, I did US, or I did UK, so maybe I can try China. And that was 25 years ago when I went out to China. I spent a week, and I like to say, you come out to China, it's kind of like come for lunch, stay for dinner. And, I made Shanghai a home for a couple of years, and then followed a girl, also got a job in Hong Kong for a year, paid rent in Hong Kong, but ended up...
You need a job just to pay rent there.
Yeah. And then it's really interesting because then we're in Hong Kong, but I kept getting sent back to China because at that point, there was only a few kind of people crazy enough willing to go back and forth between Hong Kong and China, and then spend a lot of time there. And I ended up super commuting to China. Then at that point, it was like, I told my boss, like, you might as well just move me, back to China.
Back to China.
So then I was in Beijing for 15 years.
Whoa.
So married that girl, and then we moved to Beijing, and and then that embarked on this China trip, really going deep. So I went from finance in investment banking to early stage VC in China, then going in-house to Star TV in Hong Kong, which is now Fox International. And then that brought me back to China, to Beijing. And from there, I met our friend, Mark Fisher.
Oh, Fish.
So Fish, if you're watching, hello. And we met at softball, and he's like, I told him where I'm working. He goes, you want to join the NBA? And then I'm like, man.
I'm not 6'6". I don't have a really good
exactly.
jump shot.
You're recruiting me to play
no.
basketball, but I can do office work. So that's where I got recruited. And that was a pretty amazing journey from banker to VC to in-house.
Banker to baller.
Banker to baller. And it was funny. No, it's funny how you say that, because every job I went into, I had these like pressures before you start. Like, oh my gosh, how am I going to be prepared to take on this new role? So at Star TV, my biggest thing was like, I don't have cool clothes to work in media. So I don't have any jeans. So, and then when I joined NBA, it was actually, my pressure was, I need to get my basketball game up. Because
credibility.
Yeah, because all my colleagues were playing. They had like a Thursday night run or something. And so I was like, I got to get back in shape. And then, so that was my kind of prep for getting into the NBA. And so I did 3 years at 3.5 at Fox, and I did about 3-4 years at NBA, and that was pretty amazing period of time. That was 2004 at Star TV to 2012. If my, to 2010. So that was an incredible run for myself, but also for China. We saw the rise of mobile, from feature phones to big screens. We saw the rise of internet streaming video, and it also birthed the really interesting sort of third prime time in China, which was late morning or morning to noon to 1 p.m. Time slot. And it was perfect for NBA content, which traditionally was broadcasted on televisions.
Right.
But because you're not at home, or most people watch TV at home, we coincided with the rise of the bandwidth getting faster through fiber optics. The office and schools became the new viewing places. So then that was perfect. So people were using office resources, school resources to stream NBA games. And then we had some massive audiences watching for the first time on a computer, watching games, right? This is
and that was unlike anywhere else.
This is pre whatever YouTube. This is all before YouTube. This is before internet streaming became a thing in the US, right? If you think about all the things this is pre-Netflix, right? And this is live content too.
Super cool.
So we were witnessing sort of some amazing leaps forward in China, digitalization, people getting computers and handsets for the very first time. And so it was just a wild ride. And then you had the Beijing Olympics. We had a 7'6" guy named Yao Ming show up, right? And so it was just a perfect storm of like accomplishments and right place, right time, not only for me personally, but like for the country. And so it was just an amazing period of time. And you just saw sort of the rise, right? And that everyone remembers that opening ceremony at Beijing Olympics, right? It was like coming out party and put the world on notice. And so what did I learn? I learned a lot of really interesting kind of, how to do business in China, how to do enterprise sales. At the end, we're all, I was very against a sales role early in my life as a banker, but I realized we're all sales. We're all doing sales in one form or another, right? And it's just a matter of like, you don't, and I talked to my team about this, you don't want to look like a sales person. You want to look like a partner or a consultant, not trying to sell something.
Right.
And so those were kind of, key tasks. And even as a banker, we're selling equity, right? We're selling an M&A project. We're selling shares, IPO shares. So we're all selling.
You're selling, give me your money.
Yeah. Or let me help you move money, right?
Yes.
So, and I think that's a critical skill set to be able to convince somebody, and I think about books like Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. Such a great book.
Yeah, that is a good book.
And then he did a master class and videos, and like I actually had our team watch some of this stuff.
Yeah.
It's really good stuff. So I learned a lot of the kind of operational pieces at NBA, which part was sales, but the other part is executing, right? And then client management, or we call it customer success here.
Yes.
But those things also, something is also critically important is, when you're selling multi-million-dollar deals to a customer, and we did that at MBA, we also had to take care of them. And then our team was very unique in the sense that the global media distribution team not only sold, but had to deliver to the customers. It's versus another department that would sell marketing partnerships, and they were called business development, and then they would pass it to the marketing partnerships team to handle it. So therein lies a big disconnect where you have people promising the world,
right.
Then you have another group coming in and saying, no, sorry, you can't just put Yao Ming on something because you don't have his personal right. You got to put a bunch of players on. And they're like, no, but I only care about this, right? And then when we're doing licensing deals on live game rights, you can't just show Houston Rockets games. Like, come on. Like, so we had to like slice and dice. I remember David Stern, rest in peace, he used to say, how thin can we slice the salami, right? And making sure everyone feels special. So it was like this jigsaw puzzle every month. Like, okay, how many Rockets games does, Sohu get? How many does Tencent get? How many does, remember peer-to-peer streaming? There was PP Live and PP Stream, very interesting names in early China streaming days. And like, so we created one for peer-to-peer stream, and we had like official sports website streams, and then we had NBA.com China streams, and then everything had to be also balanced with television, with CCTV and, the regional broadcasters. So it was quite complex in doing all that. So operations was sort of my first kind of foray into that. And then we did that for about 3-4 years, and then I met this really interesting guy out of Silicon Valley, Kevin Chu, and he had this interesting, curious game on Facebook called Kingdoms of Camelot. And he was introduced to me by a business partner who built fantasy games for NBA.com China. And I met him, and he said, look, I'm looking to set up a studio in China because he's seeing a trend in Silicon Valley where there's a bit of an arms race hiring good talent. And he has, as a small startup, he was a 20-person shop above a Chinese restaurant in Mountain View, and he had a tough time hiring, people who were looking at offers from Google, Facebook, you name it. And he said, and him and I talked about how, China is producing so many awesome engineers, especially in Beijing, that he should think about putting a studio there. And he actually found me because he had that vision before. Not that I went and pitched him. He said, I need someone to run this thing.
Just validated it for him.
Yeah, and it was a really interesting proposition. And it wasn't, I want you to build a team and enter China. I want you to build a team so we can build games outside of China. And it's kind of like insourcing, as I kind of coined it. And it was just a perfect kind of match for me because at that point I was in China for about 10 plus years, and I've been extremely cautious about market entry into China because, as we all know, China is just riddled with, is a graveyard of foreign companies entering China, failing, right?
Yeah.
Name your favorite Western
tech.
Yeah, there's a lot of
beverage company.
It's not just tech, right? It's up and down, right? There's only a few that bubble to the top, and so that also taught me that the keys to success for foreign companies, but for any company, needs to come down to like what separates you from the pack, right? What unique offering are you providing the marketplace, and that serves as your moat. And so I've been fortunate to join companies, and I look back now, and I think instinctually I was finding companies that had these moats. For Star TV, it was this kind of content piece, and then NBA was also very unique content. Very tall, 6 foot, 7 foot basketball players that cannot be copied, cloned, right? A very unique product that is, you can only come to the NBA for this thing, right? And there's only a few companies that continue to do well in China, and that's like Disney, Apple, NBA, Boeing, these type where you're offering something very compelling. So I think that sort of, I started figuring that out at NBA, and that kind of led me into like, how do I make my decisions going forward in my career? And what Kabam, the company I joined, renamed itself from Water Cooler to Kabam. What Kabam had at that point when I was deciding, had this little curious game on Facebook called Kingdoms of Camelot. I started playing it, and I couldn't stop. And it was this like strategy game that was a bit low in animation or and it was a little bit like, I don't know, it was, not to date myself, but like Hitchhiker's Guide, it was like that text type game, but there was more than text. We had a map, and we had a
bit better than Lode Runner.
Yeah. And we had like this map, and then it was a strategy game, and there was a lot of numbers, but it wasn't like, like these AAA games that, are being cranked out by EA or Blizzard. It was just this, this kind of web framed game framed by the Facebook, canvas. And it was so sticky. And at that point in time, it was the only game against a sea of casual games, made famous by Zynga, Farmville and some of the other stuff. And then we, at that point in time, had this little curious game that had the highest average revenue per user, tens of multiple times higher than the social, the kind of social games that, most people kind of are familiar with. And that was the moat, was no one else is doing this. I still remember a good friend of mine who recently passed away, Andy Tian, rest in peace, him too. He was at Zynga.
Tan?
Andy Tian.
Oh.
Andy Tian. He was the GM at Zynga, and then I was the head of Kabam, and then we were talking when I just joined, and he was like, "Oh, good luck with that. You don't get these big audience."
Right.
And I just nodded. I didn't say anything because he doesn't know what I know, which was on a per user basis, we were crushing it.
Wow.
So that also gave me the sense that you don't need gigantic audiences to monetize. And that sort of was a precursor to sort of what you're seeing, before the meltdown in crypto. You don't need gigantic audiences to monetize in GameFi or some of these other kind of dApps. So it was some really interesting times there, and it was also very. It was my first time kind of building something from scratch. So I became a quick student on Lean Startup Method and all the famous kind of books at that time of going from 0 to 1. And it started. I left this big company called the MBA with just a story, kitchen table at home, no office, and 18 months later, we had 150 people and we had to move offices 3 times in Beijing because we just outgrew. And every time we moved, someone says, "You're going to outgrow this thing." And I'm like, no, we're good. I don't want to move. And we kept moving. We kept taking up space from our neighbors.
Breaking walls.
Yeah, literally knocking down a wall. It's like, oh, they just left. Let's take that. So it was a really good time. This was like 2010 to 2012.
Wow.
Post, Olympics and then mobile was really
Post Olympics and pre gaming app. Good
game
quality gaming app.
Yeah. And so I still remember the moment where we literally burned the ships. We said, let's leave Facebook. And everyone's like, oh my gosh. And then we're going to experiment. We're going to take this one team in Beijing. We had 4 game teams. One game just failed. We said, we're going to shut this down. And then they said, let's take this team and have them build a mobile game. And everyone thought it was super risky, super crazy. And this was around the time where you just had the first version of Angry Birds, Cut the Rope, Fruit Ninja. Right. Remember those games? And so here we are building a hardcore strategy game against a sea of social casual. So again, we were taking more risks, and that was a big leap. And what a lot of people don't know that happened at that point in time was we almost shut the whole business down at that point. A month before, or 3 months before we launched, I was secretly tasked with shutting down the whole business, coming up with a plan to shut down the Beijing office.
Wow.
And this movie gets played out over time, right? Is that China appears to a lot of Silicon Valley companies as this shiny object. They typically go find, someone like me to run it, and hopefully that person is telling them, you got to play the long game, you got to invest, and it's not going to happen overnight. You got to have patience. And 2 or 3 years into it, they lose patience, right? And another risk, barbarians at the gate. And then it becomes a distraction, right? So I was tasked with shutting it down. I presented a plan, and I even presented an alternative plan that I would just take out the team and do a buyout. I said, let me take the team. If you're going to let them all go, I'll take them. And, or you sponsor me and I will, you invest in me and I'll take this team and so I almost went startup at that point.
Right. So you kind of had a founder's hat almost dangling on your head at that moment.
Yeah, and then I was like, I even remember going to like headhunters, but not in that way. Not that I need a job. It was like, I got a team. Help me find a company that wants to take this acqui-hire team and then take us in and sponsor it. So I was like doing all kinds of hustling. At the end, I presented the plan, and we still had like a month and a half to go before I had to like notify everyone, turn off the lights, and shoot myself. And I said, game's almost ready. We might as well just launch it, and let's test it. And then it just took off. And we tested in Canada, Australia. The numbers were off the charts.
What game was that?
This is Kings of Camelot Mobile.
Whoa.
Yep. And it took off, but we had to build it from scratch. But because we built it from scratch, and just like a lot of games, when you build something, you're, as much as everyone idealistically thinks that you can build like a perfect house, right? And you can think so far into the future that you kind of plan for everything. You can't, right? So when you build something, it's literally like a house on a house on a house on a house, right? Or a wing on a wing next there, and then you got a bunch of spaghetti code at the end, and you just got this one big hot mess that you just keep adding on to it. So that was the web version of our game. And so when we built the mobile, we did not have that baggage. We didn't have that debt. That code debt, engineering debt, as they call it sometimes. So you could build it from scratch, and knowing what we know, from our journeys on Facebook and building a web game, that helped us build a really good mobile game, and then that became the template in which we could reskin and change the theme, but use the same type of gaming mechanics and the loops. To do that. So it was really fun at that point. And then when the first couple of weeks came back, everyone's like, whoa, okay, let's not shut this down. let's keep this thing going. And so that literally saved the Beijing office. And that, I think, also paved the way for us to, I think in the early days, to start doing some business development. We had this really interesting game. We need publishers. So then I made the rounds. And I think, I'm not going to take credit for this, but because of that opportunity, we got in front of a lot of really interesting publishers in Korea and Japan and even in China who took a look at the game. And one of the Korean publishers that we showed it to early on ended up being the company that bought the majority assets of Kabam, 5 years later. Netmarble.
Netmarble. Boom.
Yeah, right. So, so it's, you talk about a ride, and kind of bringing that to full circle. I used to think, games was the most disruptive element of entertainment. Like, okay, nothing is as disruptive as the games that we're building. Or you could say games at that point was so hot in tech, right? So you say the most disruptive force in tech was games. I used to say that. And then I joined Uber.
Oh.
The most disruptive force in transportation, and you can also argue in tech.
Yeah.
And so that bridge from going to Kabam to Uber was there was about a 3-year period where I actually interviewed with Uber 3 times. A lot of people don't know that. The first time I'm like, I'd never heard of you guys. I don't know what this is. They had some launchers come out, meet people, trying to assess China market. And they're like, we're looking for like a Beijing GM. And I'm like, what does that mean? Like, why can't the GM manage all of Asia? Right. But they operated city by city at that point.
Yeah.
Second time, I'm like, okay, they found me again. Good friend of mine left Greylock, joined Uber as recruiter, and then said, can you talk to somebody, And I'm like, okay, I've heard of you guys. This was they already did Series B or something. I'm like, okay, I heard of you guys. I don't know, taxi, transportation.
Yeah, who's gonna we just go on the street and wave our hand at taxis there. Who needs that?
And then who needs that? And I'm like, man, I'm still working on this game stuff. This game stuff is taking off, right?
Yeah.
And at that point, I was I left Kabam after 3 years, and because the focus shifted more on building mobile games. And I'm a business guy, so I was like, I think my work here is done, and I want to go find other things. And so I ended up being this accidental consultant for dozens of companies, from Korea to Russia to San Francisco, and it was a really fun ride. I even consulted for the Taiwanese for HTC. They had this children's app. But at the end, I ended up getting back on the horse with Uber because the thing about consulting is you can give advice, but at the end, it's up to the companies to take it. And so I got tired of giving advice, no one listening. So I'm like, okay, it's time to get back on the horse and let's build or do something. And so it was weird. I was like, oh, I'm leaving games. What am I doing? But it was one of the most disruptive kind of experiences, more disruptive than my time at Kabam, because I went straight into the fire. First day on the job in Beijing, I walk into the Opposite House Hotel in one of the suites, and there was Travis Kalanick, Emil Michael, and the APAC leadership team. And that was my first day, trial by fire.
Wow.
Walking in, and it was one of these jam sessions that Travis was typically holding, where he just takes a problem, breaks it down, and never seen such intelligence and precision of separating the noise from the signal. And for him to go zero in on, he was incredibly truth-seeking. And that was one of the lessons was get to the truth, get to the crux of the issue. And he broke it down. He's like, okay, I'm hearing this for the first time, boom, 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 boom. Okay, so the issue is this. And then,
Isn't that such an important skill in business?
Totally, because
and
especially
in
management,
yes,
right? You're getting fed all kinds of information, and you gotta be able to pick apart stuff, because as you kind of climb the ladder, everything seems important, right? But you got to narrow it down, and people have very limited time and and attention spans. So, and you got to get to the crux of things. So now looking back as a manager, as a manager reporting to bosses, I had to boil down my kind of storytelling, right? Unlike this session right now, where I'm just kind of unpacking everything. But
have you been talking for 25 minutes?
Yeah, I know.
It's okay. I'm sure everyone's entertained, right?
I hope so. Sorry.
We're learning. That's what it's fascinating, by the way, this story.
Yeah, and I use this journey as a way to kind of teach or share kind of things I've learned along the way. And then just to kind of get back to this, as a manager, taking all this information, then you have to kind of sift out okay, not important, this is important, okay, what am I missing here? And then there's obviously framing, right? And you got to know where the person is coming from without like, you want to encourage and you want to motivate.
Bias, right?
There's total bias. There's total bias and noise. And then there's also this kind of like, CYA kind of stuff going on, right? And so sometimes you have to like not call them out, but like ask the questions and then get to the truth, right? So that's immediately seeing Travis in a very closed environment work. And I was very fortunate to take on the role, and this wasn't a city GM role. This was head of corporate and business development in APAC.
Yeah,
right? So
big.
Got to see some really cool stuff. Participate and help grow the business. I did a bunch of fundraising for Uber China, and then all of them, of course, wanted to invest in Uber Technologies, the U.S. entity. And we got to do some really interesting things, like groundbreaking stuff. I remember doing some crazy trips. I did a day trip from Beijing to Bangkok on a holiday, in a Beijing holiday. So like, bye family. Sorry, can't take you guys somewhere. I'm going to jump on a plane first thing in the morning, fly to Bangkok, take one meeting, and go back to the airport and fly back. And then by that time, it's like 1 a.m.
Wow.
Beijing airport. It's like stuff like that.
That's hustle.
It was all hustle, and that was one of like so many core principles. But like always be hustling. But that was the name of the game of our department, business development. We were a small team, led by an incredibly talented, smart Emil Michael, and for everything that's happened to him, I mean, I'm very thankful to be able to work under him and his tutelage. I learned so much about, getting into, like, he had the right balance of like knowing enough details, but also knowing how things fit in the contours and all the context. And he introduced a whole nother level of like, analysis of deals, of being prepared, knowing all the different angles. But that permeated throughout the entire business of like, understanding the competitive landscape, but at a super deep level. Like, for better or worse, we knew our competitors very well. But I have one interesting tidbit. We thought we knew Didi super well. And when we ended up selling Uber China to Didi, and we had these meetings and we started sitting down with their team, we realized that some of our GMs had a lot of biased information that fed into the machine so that, we would support their city with like marketing dollars or incentives. And let's say it wasn't fully factual, that intel. And you could looking back, there were individuals that gamed the system at Uber and saying, because we were so Uber competitive,
Right.
Pun intended, that they leveraged it. They weaponized that information. And so there was a lot of weaponizing at Uber. Travis's words, his intentions, his vision was weaponized. The managers who were looking after their own city weaponized information, intel, for their benefit. And so that's how we, spent, we spent $2 billion in a very short time, like 18 months period in China.
Wow.
Right. So you won't fault, you can't fault Uber for not trying in China, because what happened is, going back to this movie that I talked about, companies go into China, lose patience, don't want to invest, don't have the time. You can't say that about Uber. Travis was so Chinese. He didn't know it, but I mean, he kind of knew it. I said, Travis, you're very Chinese. because you're super competitive. And you also spend time thinking about, the competitive landscape. What are people doing? And then that also permeated to a meal. When we did our deals, we had deal review, and that was one of the most stressful kind of, to present a deal in front of a meal and sort of other stakeholders. He would also tear the deal apart and say, is this a good deal, bad deal? Right. And so because of him, it set a really high standard that I take with me with me now is, like I said, he had this balance of like getting into the details, but also like the Silicon Valley kind of mentality is like, don't get cute. Like try it, throw it against the wall, see if it sticks. If it doesn't, just keep moving. Right. Don't sweat these little things, especially in the context of like, how big is this? How important is this deal? What is the priorities? And, what are we trying to solve? So it forced us to be laser focused.
So, God, you've done so much. You've learned so much. You've had great leaders that you've worked with. You've had mentors. You've experimented yourself. You were a half founder. You built from the ground up. You took something from the top down, and then you sprout.
Yeah.
Like, how did this come about, and what does Sprout do?
Yeah. I'll talk about what Sprout does first, and I'll talk about how we got there. So Sprout is we're the first to do both equity and token management all on one platform. And I would not say it's just a software as a service. It also has a consulting component that we had to develop over time, just because managing equity and managing tokens is not easy. And
so when you say equity, you mean like stocks, ESOPs, RSUs?
Yeah,
things
anything that represents share ownership, whether it is shares or things that can become shares like convertibles,
right?
Which is very different from tokens. Equity represents a piece of the business, whereas tokens can be, as we all know, store of value, could be non-fungible. Could be representative of something or nothing, right? In a lot of cases, it's been nothing. But how we got started was that this movie is sort of also 10 years in the making. So when I was at Kabam and at Uber, I was introduced to a lot of these software as services. Our company was using a lot of different, SaaS products, right?
I'm kind of familiar with SaaS.
Yes. So looking at, and I looked at Cross and I'm like, oh, okay, you can tell what's a good product, what's a bad product as a user. And then I started to zero in on like things that stuck out that are bad products, right? And the one that stuck out to me was equity management, because they were all so American. And then I started digging deeper, and then I said, how much does this product cost? And we were inspired early on by, there's a bunch of American products. We were inspired by Carta, ShareWorks, and, to name a few. And we saw that it was a very American product, very compliant to IRS, SEC. And so when I was managing our teams in China, and they're like, what is a zip code? What is a social security number?
Yeah.
So like after a while, you're just like, don't worry about it. And then I'm like,
leave it blank.
Yeah. And then I'm like, why aren't they making this friendlier for the rest of us? Not just American companies. And then especially like a market like China, like, why don't you do something? Or why don't you do something for the world like Southeast Asia? And so we didn't really see we didn't see that happening. And then, and so I looked at this space and I said, the people that understand this subject matter expertise, with this subject matter expertise, they're kind of like lawyers, maybe some financial guys, but they're not builders. They're not software engineers. And then the people that can build software don't necessarily have this. So we saw this big disconnect. So we saw this service gap that needed to be filled. We did not know that underlying the service gap was a massive knowledge gap outside of US, where people that want to give shares, people that want to receive shares, often do not know how they work. Mm-hmm. And so that set us on a course where we said, what if we built something for the rest of us? Something that isn't super tied to the US, but can be used in the US. And so my co-founder, Tony, and I, we started digging in this space, and we said, what's the total addressable market? Anybody with more than one shareholder, right? But realistically, it's going to be larger companies eventually, but you got to start somewhere.
Right.
So that was the genesis. We started building as a SaaS business, building a core set of features that could address a group of companies. And in our case, it was, and I think this is the case for like a lot of SaaS businesses, is you either go long tail or you just go for like enterprise, big partners. It's kind of like Stripe versus Adyen.
Yeah.
Right. So we took the Stripe approach and said, let's build something where we don't have the pressure of like building everything under the roof. We just have some core features that satisfies. And so it took us about 18 months to come to market. And
with you guys building.
Yeah, building this thing. So grinding it out for 18 months, not knowing, where we're going to be. And we were super scrappy.
Right.
Right. We were
making mistakes,
building stuff, fast. And I don't know, and then at a point in time, I said, Tony, we got to draw the line and we got to put this out there and we got to test this with some customers. So we started handing this out for free, right? Beta trials everywhere. And then we were onto something and people were like, this is really good. This is really interesting. And then that inspired us to keep building and then start charging for our services. And then I like to think... How good
does it feel when you get the first paying
Oh my
customer?
gosh, it was so stressful, right?
Right.
And it's also your baby, right? And it's like, I want you to just love my baby, but we also have to pay the bills, right?
The value exchange finally happens, right?
And then price discovery, right? Yeah. That is such a journey to where we are now. But when we first got started, we were unsure if this thing going to be attractive enough. Someone's going to pay us for it. But we're now like at 4 years, right? So we've been building for 4 years. So imagine, and we reached industry feature parity a year ago. And that journey of like building and selling is, I knew going in, like what we say, you know what you know, but you don't know what you don't know. I didn't know that you don't know what you don't know was so massively big, that bucket, right? We did not know that there would be a global pandemic 9 months after we started building this thing. We did not know that we would have to launch a product in the middle of COVID with markets and borders shut.
Right.
Right. We did not know we had to sell this over Zoom. Right. And then we also watched intently the rise of crypto in 2019, 2020, 21. And then during this journey, our customers came to us and said, well, you're helping me design and build ESOP and launch ESOP. I also want to give tokens to them. And we've been looking for a crypto project to sink our teeth in. And the rationale was like, our employees, they're Gen Z, they totally get tokens. They don't understand fully ESOP, and that's why we exist, is to help bridge that. And they said, help me design and launch and track tokens as a form of compensation. And during that time, I've always scratched my head when like people work for these like, early Web3 companies, these DAOs, and they only took tokens as comp.
Right.
Right. But they took off. And during that time, it was like, people didn't even want cash. They wanted the tokens.
Yeah.
And that was very foreign to me. But we said, there's something really interesting to be able to track and see and read from the blockchain the ownership at any given moment. And we looked around, and who's doing that? No one's doing that. And we could be the first to track ownership of tokens like we do in equity. And then solve this team compensation piece. And what we also saw an opportunity was to track something off-chain that no one really talks about. And what is off-chain? Off-chain is, join my company, I'll give you tokens, but I don't have them yet. But every month you're going to get something. So how do you track that? It's not on the chain. Or someone comes along and says, I like your company, I'm going to give you money today for future tokens. And that started out as a simple agreement for future tokens, SAFT, like a safe note. And then the SEC kind of poo-pooed on it, and so everyone let's call it a warrant, a token warrant. But basically, it's the same thing, same idea.
Yes, same, but different.
Yeah, and so because we cut our teeth building all this for equity holders, it was very easy to build Folium, which is the token management module that sits alongside our equity piece called Sprout. So how did the Sprout name come about, and what is Folium, right? So we started with my little project company called Mustard Seed Ventures. And then I used it as like my consulting piece and incubation of ideas. And then I had to submit an application to Cyberport incubation program, which they give government grants and government-funded grants. So I needed an idea, I needed a name, I needed a project. So I said, all right, Mustard Seed Ventures is going to create this company called Roots Technologies. And that's the name of our company, is Roots. And we're going to have a product called Sprout. And the reason I looked at Sprout is back in the day when I was a baby banker at DLJ Securities during 1.0, .com 1.0 days, there was this old VC firm called Sprout. And I really liked what it embodied and what it represented. And after being acquired by CSFB, they got rid of the fund. So Sprout no longer existed. But then it always stuck to me that, I really like what it represents. And yes, there's a million Sprouts. I mean, there's a not to give anybody credit, but there's a bunch of companies out there named Sprout, right? So I'm not doing myself any favors with the URLs and things like that, but I really like the idea of the brand. And it was very different than our competitors that are always using some shares or something motif. So I said, seeds built roots became Sprout. And so when we thought about what do we name this token management piece, we spent a bunch of time thinking about that versus I had 1 week to decide on Sprout. Couple of months we researched and came across Folium, which is Latin for leaf. And that made sense. So we said, hey, and then we looked up Folium. Is there anything out there? Not much. So, and especially in crypto space. So we saw an opening.
You have a very green thumb.
I do.
Yeah.
No,
it's quite interesting. No pun intended.
No pun intended.
Yeah.
So then we have Folium.xyz, which is a super trendy kind of URL. So that was kind of cool. But Sprout, we settled on getsprout.co. So some people call us GetSprout, which is kind of funny. So that's fine. And then the latest iteration of our business that I'm happy to share is we are entering China.
Whoa. That's huge market.
It's a huge market.
Something that you know.
Something that I know. We were returning to our roots, no pun intended.
And you're going to sprout up there.
So we had to come up with a Chinese name for Roots. Right, for the business. And it can't be just Sprout because, how do you say that in Chinese? Yeah. It's weird. So we couldn't directly translate. But we came up with something, and this product has to be very different from our SaaS business. It's going to be very different. And we gave it a name called 榕树. But if you hear what I just said, that sounds basically like banyan tree, 榕树. But it's a different 榕. It is the money or fuse,
Right.
like 金融, the
金融.
rong, right? So then 树 is tree, so money tree.
Money tree.
Money tree. So 榕树. And if you think about a tree, it has, you kind of, it grows and it ties everything together, and it really embodies sort of our journey, starting from equity and even growing into tokens. But then the product offering has gone deeper. We built a lot of, like I said, we reached feature parity of our industry, but then we went really deep on automation. We built some features that even our competitors don't have. And most importantly, our China module will have the ability to calculate withholding taxes in China for every city you can think of, which is super hard to do.
Wow.
And thanks to the magic of our engineering team, we were making this happen. And that has allowed us to cook up some really interesting partnerships that we haven't signed, and we're in the process of closing right now. So,
But that
announcing
would
soon.
mean that even foreign people that work for foreign companies inside of China have that complexity as well.
Yes. Yeah. Because they have it's like an American working in America will have withholding taxes.
Right.
Right. State, local, state, and federal. Right. And China is actually quite similar. So it's actually funny. The tax regime in China and US are quite similar. You have national, provincial, and city level withholdings. And you have social security. In China, it's social benefits, 社保. And and then it's a progressive tax scheme, just like in the US. So, as in the midst of like Sino-US relations and all the different fights that are going on, I think China and US are actually quite similar in many respects.
Yes, of course.
Right.
They both learn from each other all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's sort of the genesis, and that's, in keeping with our kind of, organic growth, so to speak, of our brand.
And so now, like, we see more and more companies sprouting up in Asia, and of course in Southeast Asia being a very big source of innovation, right? And even in India, right? I mean, how does a company like you guys, Sprout, address both the equity or stakeholder management, as well as the crypto side or crypto assets? Like, how do you guys get in? How do you see these markets, and how are you penetrating into there?
Yeah, it's hard. And it's one big hot mess. I kind of compare it to like the European Union without a common currency, without common common laws, right? You have Southeast Asia, and by extension, India, right, is just a conglomerate of different countries, different cultures, different languages, different currencies, different ecosystems. And it's hard. It's tiring, right? To kind of use the Uber analogies, when we looked at Grab and Gojek, did you know the founders actually were business school classmates, Nadeem and Anthony at HBS? They both had this dream of building a super app in Southeast Asia. They both thought and agreed that transportation was going to be the major hook to this super app. They were inspired by WeChat. But they had a very different approach. Nadeem said, let's say laser focus, work on one country, Indonesia. Anthony, being Malaysian, said, "Let's start in Singapore, and then let's land grab, let's expand." Right? Tale of two companies. Looking back, Nadeem stayed focused, got to scale really quick, merged with Tokopedia, formed GoTo, IPO'd, right? Anthony and Grab had to duplicate their playbook across different countries, right? Following what Uber did. Every time they do that, they have to increase their costs. And their costs, their expense started stacking on top, right? You have a Philippines team, Thailand team, et cetera, et cetera. And when you do that, it's not like you can't really, your costs go up, but is your revenue going to keep pace with it? And I would argue that's very hard to do. And just draw another example of our Taiwan roots, TSMC. With, they had to, for a long time, they enjoyed factories in Taiwan and China. But because of geopolitics, they've had to also de-risk themselves and set up factories in other parts of the world, U.S., and other regions, which means the costs of these chips are just going to go up because their cost base, right, has increased multiples, right? So now we're seeing, $1,000 phones, right, in the marketplace, and the cost of chips are just going to go up and higher and higher. And we've seen the end of days of like cheap phones, right, because just chipsets are just expensive.
Getting expensive,
right? So Southeast Asia is to me like a very curious market, because I'm always reminded, like if you think about the world's, if you draw a circle around China and Southeast Asia, right? Within that circle there's more people within that circle than outside that circle, as people have shared, on social, and in the future, and the engine is going to be within this circle. But you have these little countries that kind of stack up, and it's hard to run something across multiple markets, especially if you are running a business that needs to be on the ground with operations. And so just to kind of go full circle, Grab's expenses are pretty high, and they ended up having to do a SPAC to get out. And I would say that their business compared to Gojak's is, not as robust. And now Gojek has the luxury of now entering into Singapore and other markets because they have this strong base, right? So, yeah, it's a challenge, and that's why it at the end of last year, it forced us to take a look and say, where do we need to be in order to, one, survive this kind of winter, whether it's crypto or, this global this new financial crisis where banks are failing, right? And right now, a lot of startups are dealing with pressures of not having enough cash, burning, right? Trying to cut costs. And so for us to strategically look at a market like China, which represents the second singular largest market on the planet, made a lot of sense for us. But that doesn't mean we give up on Southeast Asia. It is incredibly important. It is just so complex and diverse. So, one of the things I've learned now is if you're going to do Southeast Asia, right, you got to be prepared to deal with multiple ecosystems and partners.
Yes.
And just because you talk to one VC or one influencer or one significant party in one country doesn't mean you have another country, right? It just means, okay, you got that ecosystem.
Yeah.
Maybe a little better.
So basically, you guys are saying like, let's go crack the big challenging opportunity, the one that is the most difficult, because that's where the greatest reward is going to come
Yeah,
from.
I mean, as a business operator, I think if we're able to crack a very large market, that will enable us to hit scale faster, which will then allow us to make further investments into new markets, new products. And if we continue down this path of hitting these fragmented markets, it could be like death by 1,000 cuts. Mm-hmm. And if you don't have the cash flow to last, and some people are saying you got to have cash until 2025 in order to survive, right? And that puts a lot of fear in a lot of founders, right? Because, how many of us right now have cash to 2025? Who knows? And that's putting, and so for us, we feel like it's going to be a two-pronged approach, where as a SaaS business, it's really forcing me to kind of remove myself from day-to-day kind of stuff, sort of founder's dilemma, right? Where in the beginning, if you're not hands-on, you're not selling, you're not involved, and you're not gonna survive. But then you need to quickly be able to develop a framework in which your teams can sell without you and can do things, right? And so we're equipping our teams in Southeast Asia to be able to do that without me spending all that time, so I can focus on, currently on my plate is China, right? I got to get China right. And if I can get China right, then everything kind of falls into place. So you got to pick your battles. But I can't just have China.
Yeah.
Right? Because so it's important for me to equip my team. And so it's all, people, process, and tools, right?
Yeah. It's pretty awesome how in the past 20 years of your career, right, all roads somehow lead through China or into China.
Right?
And it always
comes back, right? Because if you look at SaaS across Asia Pacific, the most mature market, I hate to say, for SaaS is China, but China is also a wasteland of not only foreign companies, but also
Chinese companies.
Yes. Chinese companies failing because we are so competitive. We as in Chinese,
yes,
right? And one big misconception is China is just one race, right? It's like so many ethnic, like 55 ethnic.
I mean, this is the misconception that they think that it's, as a foreign company, you go into China thinking that you got to compete with the big player in China, but inside of China, there's so many Me Too's of Me Too's, and they're all fighting against each other.
They're fighting each other, and there's different regions, right? And it's almost like China is like this own little ecosystem, right, of different regions. Like Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, Shenzhen is like their own, and Hangzhou, and Chengdu, and so that's big enough. And so for us, if we can solve and quickly get to profitability, leveraging China, that will pave the way for us to do more investments in Southeast Asia, into crypto. And one of the things that we pride ourselves in is product development. Is like Tony and his team are so good at building stuff, right? But we could be like chasing our own tail if we're not focused. And so again, it becomes this dilemma where you want to build ahead of market trends, but at the same time, you also have to build stuff that people want, that people want to pay for, right? And oftentimes, coming back to founder's dilemma, is that the last thing a SaaS company needs to do is to customize everything every time for somebody, right? Because then you're just spending too much time on one customer, right? And you want to build something that like it can sell itself, serve itself,
grow itself.
Yeah, right, and grow itself, right?
Dude, this has been so awesome. I feel like it's almost like a master class of little tidbits of learnings throughout your career. And obviously, we wish you great success in continuing to build this. But before we wrap, I want to do a quick fire round with you.
Sure.
Are you down?
Let's do it.
All right, man. So, what do you miss the most about working at Uber?
I think the collective brain power, right? The talent density, as I call it, like working with like really smart people. Not that I'm not, but like it was just that moment in time where like, we just had this, just amazing kind of period of like camaraderie.
A++ people all in a room.
Doing the same thing, trying to work on a common goal. Like, it's just, I try to take a lot of those elements into my company, but I was also incredibly stressed out. Probably got all my white hair from that time.
Well, at least you still have hair. Who's your favorite NBA player?
Magic Johnson.
Magic Johnson. Oh, you are an LA boy.
I'm an LA boy, man.
And so I guess their favorite NBA team would be?
The Lakers.
The Lakers.
The Lake Show.
Nice. So what do you think is the biggest misconception about doing business in China?
Ooh, there's a bunch, right? I'd say the number one is thinking that China is a bunch of people that are just copying and not innovating. There's so much innovation. I just came back from Shenzhen after 3 years also, and it's like literally stepping into the future relative to Hong Kong.
Wow.
So, maybe another podcast for another time, but it's just, there's so much innovation going on in China. Even, China is also known as low tech manufacturer, but there's so much high tech happening, right? Like on the street was like all these electric vehicles, and it was just, anyways, it's a step into the future.
I was actually, I think there was something that, an article that there's more Chinese branded cars sold in China today than foreign brand. And it might seem obvious, right? But it's not, because think how powerful Volkswagen was in China.
Volkswagen, GM.
For all these years.
Ford, yeah.
And over the past few years, that has all shifted.
It's all shifted. And like BYD all over the streets. Yeah. They all look like Teslas.
Yes.
They're even better than Teslas, more comfortable. Like, Warren Buffett is not a dumb investor, right? Yeah. There's a reason why he put money in them.
Pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
So who's your biggest inspiration?
Oh, I thought my grandfather, very entrepreneurial. Last boat from Xiamen to Jingmen. He had to wait for my aunt to be fully like 1 month old to travel. And that was the last transport to Taiwan. Built a business in partnership with the U.S. Air Force, a radio station, and like entrepreneur from the ground up.
Wow!
So he's my inspiration.
So if you could have dinner with 3 people, any 3 people, doesn't matter living or otherwise, who would they be?
That's an interesting question, because I also think about the dynamics of the conversation at that table, right? Not just me asking all of them different questions. It's just like, who do I want to interact? I would say Jesus.
Okay.
Einstein and Elon Musk.
Jesus, Einstein, and Elon Musk.
Think about that conversation.
Wow.
Seriously. The universe, from an academic standpoint, versus, the spiritual universe, versus the future.
Versus getting out of the universe.
Right? Imagine if, like, Elon says to Jesus, is there life on Mars? Right?
Wow.
Or like that would be, I don't know. I think that
would be a crazy dinner to sit at.
And then Einstein, right? Like playing it out.
And of course you.
I'd be moderator.
Andy, this has been awesome, man.
Ronan, I really appreciate it. This is fun. Thanks for the time.
Thank you for joining us on Epicenter.
Thanks for having me.
That's a wrap.